The Silver Whisper Guild's tavern reeked of stale ale and broken dreams, its wooden floors scarred by countless boots, and its walls blackened by smoke from pipes that burned herbs better left unnamed. Asher Blackthorn sat hunched over his cards, watching his last few coins disappear into the hands of a smirking merchant who had clearly been using enhancement magic all evening. The young mage's dark hair fell across his eyes, hiding the frustration that burned there like embers waiting for kindling. At 22, Asher had already earned a reputation as one of the most promising battle mages in the kingdom, but his talent for combat magic was matched only by his talent for making poor decisions. Tonight's gambling session was merely the latest in a series of choices that had led him further and further from the path his noble family had laid out for him. "One more hand," Asher said, his voice carrying the kind of desperate confidence that preceded spectacular failures. "I'll stake something better than coin." The merchant's eyes glittered with avarice. "Oh? And what might that be?" Asher's fingers moved to the silver amulet that hung around his neck, an artifact that had been in his family for generations. He had always assumed it was merely decorative, a symbol of his bloodline's magical heritage. The pendant felt warm against his skin, almost alive, but he had never paid it much attention. It was just another piece of the privileged life he had been born into, as unremarkable as his title or his trust fund. "This," he said, lifting the amulet, "it's worth more than everything on this table combined." The merchant leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. "A family heirloom? How deliciously dramatic. But what's the wager? What could you possibly offer that would make me risk such a valuable prize?" Asher's mind raced, alcohol and desperation combining to fuel his recklessness. "A magical oath," he said finally. "I'll speak a binding truth that will follow me for the rest of my life." The tavern fell silent, conversations dying as patrons turned to stare at the young noble who had just proposed something unprecedented. Magical oaths were not toys to be gambled with. They were binding contracts with reality itself, capable of reshaping a person's very nature. Most people went their entire lives without speaking even one such oath, and here was Asher Blackthorn offering to bind himself with words chosen by a stranger. "Interesting," the merchant purred. "And what truth would you speak?" Asher's heart hammered against his ribs, but he was too far gone to back down now. "You choose. Whatever you want me to say, I'll say it, and it will become my reality." The merchant's smile was predatory. "Very well. If you lose this hand, you will speak these words. I am attracted to men, and this is my fate." Laughter rippled through the tavern, cruel and mocking. Asher felt heat rise in his cheeks, but he nodded anyway. It was just words, after all. A silly oath that would mean nothing once he won back his dignity and his gold. The cards were dealt. Asher's hand was mediocre at best, but he had staked everything on this moment. He watched the merchant's face, looking for tells, for any sign of weakness. But the man's expression remained impassive, confident in a way that made Asher's stomach churn. When the hands were revealed, Asher's world collapsed. The merchant's cards were not just better. They were perfect, a combination that should have been statistically impossible. The enhancement magic that had been at work all evening had reached its crescendo, and Asher was left staring at his failure with nothing but empty hands and a promise he now had to keep. "The oath," the merchant said softly. "Speak it." Asher's mouth felt dry as sand. Around him, the tavern had fallen silent again, every patron waiting to witness his humiliation. He could still back out, could forfeit the amulet and walk away with whatever dignity he had left. But pride, that fatal flaw of his bloodline, would not allow him to surrender. "I am attracted to men," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And this is my fate." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, and Asher felt something fundamental shift inside him. The amulet around his neck grew warm, then hot, then began to pulse with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. Pain lanced through his skull, and for a moment he thought he might collapse right there in the tavern. Then a voice spoke in his mind, clear and cold as winter starlight. "Oath accepted. New quest initiated. Discover true love. Risk level fatal." Asher's eyes went wide as he realized what had happened. The amulet was not just a piece of jewelry. It was a system artifact, one of the legendary magical items that could reshape reality according to their own mysterious rules. And he had just activated it with the most binding oath possible. "What have I done?" he whispered. The voice in his head was almost amused. "You have chosen to play a game whose rules you do not understand. But do not fear, young mage. I will be your guide through the trials ahead. Though I cannot promise you will survive them." The merchant collected his winnings with a satisfied smile, apparently unaware that anything supernatural had occurred. The other patrons began to disperse, already moving on to new entertainments. But Asher remained frozen in his seat, staring at the amulet that had become both his curse and his salvation. Over the next few days, the magical echo of his oath spread through the city like ripples in a pond. Such bindings were impossible to conceal from those who knew how to look for them, and the noble circles that Asher's family moved in were full of people with exactly that kind of knowledge. It began with whispered conversations and meaningful glances, but soon escalated to open gossip and pointed questions. Asher tried to maintain his usual facade, attending social gatherings and family dinners as if nothing had changed. But the system's voice was a constant presence in his mind, commenting on his interactions with a detached clinical interest that made him feel like a specimen under observation. Subject shows increased physiological response to male targets. The voice would note when Asher found himself noticing the way sunlight caught in another man's hair. Emotional resistance remains high, but is beginning to show signs of deterioration. The breaking point came during a formal dinner at the Blackthorn estate, when Asher's father confronted him directly about the rumors that had been circulating. "Is it true?" Lord Blackthorn asked, his voice carrying the kind of authority that had once commanded armies. "Have you bound yourself to such a thing?" Asher felt the weight of his family's expectations pressing down on him like a physical force. 3 generations of magical nobility, of carefully arranged marriages and strategic alliances, of duty and honor and tradition. And here he was, the heir to it all, bound by his own foolishness to a path that would destroy everything they had built. "Father, answer me, boy. Is it true?" The system's voice whispered in his mind. "The oath compels honesty in matters of the heart. You cannot lie about this, even to yourself." "Yes," Asher said, the word torn from his throat. "It's true." The silence that followed was deafening. Asher watched his father's face cycle through shock, disappointment, and finally cold fury. His mother, Lady Blackthorn, had gone pale as marble, her hands trembling as she set down her wine glass. "Then you are no son of mine," Lord Blackthorn said finally. "Pack your things. You have until dawn to leave this house and never return." Asher felt something break inside him, a final connection to the life he had known severing with an almost audible snap. "Father, please, I didn't choose this." "The oath. The oath was your choice," his father replied. "And now you must live with the consequences." That night, Asher packed his few remaining possessions into a worn leather satchel. The amulet pulsed against his chest, its warmth the only comfort he had left. As he prepared to leave the only home he had ever known, the system's voice spoke again. "The first trial begins now. You must learn to survive without the protection of your family name. But do not despair. Every ending is also a beginning." Asher walked out into the pre-dawn darkness with nothing but a single silver coin and the mocking voice of an ancient artifact for company. The city streets were empty except for the occasional drunk or street sweeper, and the morning air carried the scent of rain and new beginnings. He wandered aimlessly for hours, uncertain where to go or what to do. The system had been quiet since his departure from the family estate, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the growing realization that he was truly on his own for the first time in his life. No family connections, no trust fund, no carefully planned future. Just him and whatever skills he could muster to survive. By afternoon, exhaustion and hunger were beginning to take their toll. Asher found himself in the poorest section of the city, where the buildings leaned against each other like drunken friends and the streets were narrow enough to block out most of the sunlight. He had been walking for hours, and his feet ached in his expensive boots, which were designed more for appearance than practical use. It was in this maze of forgotten alleys that he encountered the first person who would change his life forever. The attack came without warning. 3 men emerged from the shadows, their faces hidden by rough cloth masks, and their hands already reaching for the weapons at their belts. Asher's magical training kicked in immediately, power flowing through his veins as he prepared to defend himself. But exhaustion and emotional turmoil had left him slower than usual, and the first attacker was already upon him before he could complete his casting. The blade sliced across his ribs, not deep enough to be fatal, but certainly enough to draw blood and send him stumbling backward. Pain flared through his side, and Asher felt his concentration scatter like leaves in a windstorm. He tried to gather his magic again, but the second attacker was already moving, a club raised high to crush his skull. The blow never landed. A figure dropped from the rooftop above, landing between Asher and his attackers with the fluid grace of a born predator. The newcomer was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of build that spoke of countless hours spent in training and combat. His auburn hair caught the filtered sunlight, and when he turned to face the would-be robbers, Asher saw eyes the color of liquid amber. Miles Wolfhart, heir to the Northern Pack and everything Asher had once thought he despised. The werewolf's transformation was partial but devastating. His canines elongated into fangs, his fingernails became claws, and his muscles swelled with supernatural strength. The attackers took one look at him and fled, disappearing into the labyrinthine streets like smoke. Miles turned to Asher, and for a moment they simply stared at each other. Their families had been feuding for generations, a conflict that had its roots in territorial disputes and political maneuvering that neither young man fully understood. They had been raised to see each other as enemies, competitors for resources and influence that their fathers deemed essential. But now, in this forgotten alley with blood seeping through Asher's shirt, old animosities seemed less important than they once had. "You're hurt?" Miles said, his voice carrying a concern that Asher had never heard before. "I'm fine," Asher replied automatically, though he could feel his strength ebbing with each heartbeat. Miles stepped closer, and Asher caught his scent, something wild and clean that spoke of forest nights and open skies. "You're not fine. You're bleeding, and you look like you haven't slept in days." Asher wanted to maintain his pride, to insist that he could handle his problems on his own. But the system's voice whispered in his mind, reminding him that survival was more important than dignity. I don't have anywhere to go," he admitted, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Miles was quiet for a long moment, his amber eyes studying Asher's face with an intensity that made the young mage feel exposed and vulnerable. "You can come with me," he said finally. "I have a place. It's not much, but it's safe." Asher's first instinct was to refuse, to let his pride carry him away from this moment of weakness. But the blood loss was making him dizzy, and the afternoon sun was beginning to set, bringing with it the promise of a cold night on the streets. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you help me?" Miles smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "Because you need help, and I'm not the kind of person who walks away from that." The werewolf's apartment was a modest space above a blacksmith's shop, furnished with practical items that spoke of a life lived simply. Miles helped Asher to a worn couch and disappeared into what Asher assumed was a kitchen, returning with a basin of water and clean cloth. "Let me see the wound," Miles said, kneeling beside the couch. Asher hesitated, then slowly lifted his shirt. The cut was longer than he had thought, stretching from his ribs to his hip in a thin red line. It wasn't deep enough to be life-threatening, but it would need attention to heal properly. Miles cleaned the wound with gentle efficiency, his touch surprisingly tender for someone with such obvious physical strength. Asher found himself watching the werewolf's face as he worked, noting the concentration in his amber eyes, the way his auburn hair fell across his forehead. "There," Miles said, sitting back on his heels. "It should heal clean now." "Thank you," Asher said, meaning it more than he had meant anything in a long time. Miles stood and moved to the window, looking out at the city beyond. "You don't have to tell me what happened, but if you want to talk about it." Asher closed his eyes, feeling the weight of everything that had led him to this moment. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake that cost me everything. We all make mistakes, Miles said softly. The question is what we do afterward. The system's voice stirred in Asher's mind, amused and knowing. Interesting. The wolf shows more wisdom than expected. Perhaps this trial will prove more engaging than anticipated. Asher opened his eyes and looked at Miles, really looked at him for the first time. The werewolf was handsome in a way that spoke of wild places and dangerous nights, but there was something else there too. A kindness that Asher had never expected, a gentleness that seemed at odds with his fearsome reputation. I can't stay long, Asher said, though even as he spoke the words, he wasn't sure he meant them. Miles turned from the window, his expression unreadable. Stay as long as you need. I'm not going anywhere. That night, Asher lay on Miles's couch and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the city settling into sleep. The werewolf had retired to his bedroom after ensuring that Asher had everything he needed, but his presence seemed to linger in the air like a physical thing. The system's voice whispered in his mind, analytical and cold. Subject shows increased heart rate and elevated stress hormones in proximity to the werewolf. Emotional attachment forming despite subject's conscious resistance. Shut up, Asher muttered under his breath. I am programmed to observe and report. Your comfort is not my concern. Asher rolled over, pulling the blanket over his head. But sleep was a long time coming, and when it finally arrived, it brought dreams of amber eyes and gentle hands. The next few days passed in a strange rhythm of healing and uncertainty. Miles left each morning for his work as a guard with the city watch, returning in the evening with food and stories of his day. Asher spent his time reading books from Miles's small library and trying to ignore the way his heart rate increased whenever he heard the werewolf's footsteps on the stairs. The system was relentless in its observations, cataloging every interaction and analyzing every emotional response. It was like having a clinical researcher living in his head, one who found his growing feelings for Miles to be a fascinating subject of study. Subject continues to show signs of romantic attachment. The voice noted one evening as Asher found himself watching Miles prepare dinner. Pupil dilation, increased respiration, and elevated body temperature all indicate arousal response. Asher gritted his teeth and tried to focus on the book in his lap, but the words seemed to blur together. He was attracted to Miles, there was no denying that now. The werewolf moved with a fluid grace that spoke of power held in check, and his rare smiles were like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. But attraction was different from love, and Asher was beginning to understand that the system's quest would not be satisfied with mere physical desire. It wanted something deeper, something that would reshape his very soul. I don't understand why you're helping me, Asher said one evening as they sat together after dinner. Our families have been enemies for generations. Miles was quiet for a long moment, his amber eyes reflecting the firelight. Maybe that's exactly why I'm helping you. Maybe I'm tired of carrying around other people's hatred. And maybe you're just being naive, Asher replied, though the words lacked conviction. Maybe, Miles agreed, but I'd rather be naive than bitter. The comment stung, perhaps because it carried more truth than Asher wanted to acknowledge. He had been raised on bitterness, fed a steady diet of grievances and resentments that had shaped his worldview from childhood. The idea that he could simply choose to let go of all that anger was both terrifying and liberating. I should go, Asher said suddenly, standing from his chair. I've imposed on your hospitality long enough. Miles looked up at him, surprise clear on his face. You don't have to leave. I told you you can stay as long as you need. But I can't, Asher said, his voice carrying a desperation that he couldn't quite hide. I can't stay here and pretend that this is normal, that we're just two people who happen to meet by chance. What if we are? Miles asked, rising to face him. What if everything that came before doesn't matter as much as what's happening now? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and danger. Asher felt the system stirring in his mind, its attention focused on this moment with laser-like intensity. You don't understand, Asher said, his hand moving instinctively to the amulet around his neck. I'm not free to choose. I'm bound by forces beyond my control. Miles stepped closer, and Asher caught that wild scent again, something that made his pulse quicken despite his best efforts to remain calm. Everyone is bound by something, the werewolf said softly. The question is whether we let those bindings define us or whether we find a way to make them serve us. Before Asher could respond, Miles closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to cup Asher's face. The werewolf's touch was warm and slightly rough, calloused from years of weapon work and physical labor. You're not as alone as you think, Miles whispered, his breath warm against Asher's cheek. The kiss that followed was gentle and hesitant, a question rather than a demand. Asher felt something inside him break open, a dam of emotion that he had been holding back for days. He kissed Miles back with desperate hunger, his hands fisting in the werewolf's shirt as if he could somehow anchor himself to this moment. When they finally broke apart, both men were breathing hard, their faces flushed with desire and uncertainty. Asher began, then stopped, not sure what he wanted to say. I know, Miles said, his forehead resting against Asher's. I know it's complicated, but I don't care about complicated right now. The system's voice was triumphant in Asher's mind. Significant progress detected. Subject has achieved first romantic milestone. Quest advancement, 12%. The cold analysis shattered the moment like a stone thrown through glass. Asher pulled away from Miles, his face burning with shame and confusion. I have to go, he said, grabbing his coat from the chair where he had left it. I have to leave now. Asher, wait. But Asher was already at the door, his hand on the latch. Thank you for everything, but I can't do this. I can't be what you want me to be. He fled into the night, leaving Miles standing in the doorway with confusion and hurt written across his face. The system's voice followed him into the darkness, clinical and unmoved by his emotional turmoil. Subject shows signs of psychological resistance to quest parameters. Recommend alternative approach. Asher ran through the empty streets until his lungs burned and his legs could no longer carry him. He collapsed against a wall in an alley that smelled of garbage and despair, gasping for breath and fighting back tears. Why are you doing this to me? He whispered to the amulet. I am fulfilling the parameters of your oath, the system replied. You bound yourself to discover true love. I am merely providing the means to achieve that goal. But I don't want it, Asher said, his voice breaking. I don't want to feel this way. Want is irrelevant. The oath has been spoken, and the magic set in motion. You cannot escape your fate any more than you can escape your own shadow. Asher closed his eyes and let the tears fall. He had thought he understood the consequences of his foolish gamble. But the reality was far more complex than he had imagined. The system was not just compelling him to find love. It was forcing him to confront every fear and insecurity that had shaped his life. And the worst part was that he had been happy, if only for a moment. Miles's kiss had awakened something in him that he had never known existed, a capacity for joy and connection that seemed to transcend the boundaries of his magical bindings. But how could he trust those feelings when he knew they were being manipulated by forces beyond his control? How could he give his heart to someone when he wasn't even sure it was truly his to give? The next morning found Asher wandering the city's commercial district, trying to lose himself in the crowd of merchants and shoppers. He had spent the night in a cheap inn, paying for his room with the last of his silver and wondering what he would do when the money ran out. The system had been mercifully quiet since his flight from Miles's apartment, but its presence was a constant weight in his mind. He could feel it watching, waiting, analyzing his every move for signs of progress toward its mysterious goals. It was while he was browsing the stalls of a magical components market that he encountered the second person who would change his life forever. The Arcanist Guild's archive was housed in a massive stone building that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its dark walls were covered in symbols that shifted and changed when viewed directly, and its windows were made of glass that showed different scenes depending on the viewer's perspective. Asher had come here seeking information about his amulet, hoping to find some way to break the system's hold over him. The archive was open to the public, though few ordinary citizens had any reason to visit. Most of the people who came here were scholars, researchers, or practitioners of the more esoteric magical arts. He was deep in the stacks, poring over a tome that discussed the theoretical foundations of binding magic, when he became aware of someone watching him. The feeling was subtle at first, like the touch of a cold breeze on the back of his neck, but it grew stronger until he couldn't ignore it anymore. Asher looked up from his book to find a figure standing in the shadows between two tall shelves. The person was tall and lean, with pale skin that seemed to glow in the dim light. His hair was black as midnight, pulled back in a severe style that emphasized the sharp angles of his face. But it was his eyes that caught Asher's attention. They were the color of fresh blood, and they seemed to see everything. "You're looking for answers," the stranger said, his voice carrying an accent that Asher couldn't quite place. "But the questions you're asking are the wrong ones." Asher closed the book and stood, his hand moving instinctively to the amulet around his neck. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" The stranger smiled, and Asher saw that his teeth were slightly pointed, like a predator's. "I am Dante Shadowfire, and no, we have not met. But I know who you are, Asher Blackthorn. Your oath has created ripples in the magical currents that those of us who practice the deeper arts cannot ignore." "You're a demon," Asher said, recognition dawning. The pale skin, the red eyes, the pointed teeth, all were markers of demonic heritage. "Half demon," Dante corrected. "My father was human, which makes me something of an oddity in both worlds. But it also gives me unique insights into the nature of binding magic." The system's voice stirred in Asher's mind, suddenly alert and interested. "Significant magical presence detected. Subject shows elevated stress response. Recommend caution." "What do you want?" Asher asked, though he found himself oddly unafraid of the demon. "To offer you assistance," Dante replied. "Your amulet is not just a system artifact. It's a fragment of something much older and more powerful. The magic that binds you is ancient, predating most of the civilizations that have risen and fallen in this world." Asher felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that your oath has connected you to forces that exist outside of normal time and space. The system is not controlling you. It's interpreting a destiny that was written long before you were born." Dante stepped closer, and Asher caught his scent, something that reminded him of winter nights and distant fires. "I've seen you before in dreams and visions. Different faces, different lives, but always the same soul searching for the same thing." "That's impossible," Asher protested, though something deep inside him responded to the demon's words with recognition. "Is it?" Dante asked. "Your family's amulet has been passed down for generations, always to the heir who would need it most. Do you really think it's a coincidence that you were drawn to make that particular oath at that particular moment?" The implications of what Dante was suggesting were staggering. If the demon was right, then Asher's entire life had been leading to this moment, every choice and circumstance carefully orchestrated to bring him to this point. "Even if that's true," Asher said, his voice barely above a whisper, "what does it matter? I'm still bound by the oath, still trapped by the system's demands." "But you're not trapped," Dante replied. "You're being given a choice. The system can guide you toward your destiny, but it cannot force you to accept it. That decision is yours alone." Asher looked into the demon's red eyes and saw something there that made his heart race, not fear, but attraction. Dante was beautiful in a way that was both alluring and dangerous, like a blade that had been forged in hell's fires. "Why are you telling me this?" Asher asked. "What's in it for you?" Dante's smile was enigmatic. "Perhaps I'm simply interested in seeing how this story ends. Or perhaps I have reasons of my own for wanting to help you understand your fate." The system's voice was urgent now, almost agitated. "Warning. Subject shows signs of emotional attachment to potential rival. Recommend immediate withdrawal from current situation." But Asher found himself moving closer to Dante rather than away. There was something about the demon that called to him, something that felt like recognition on a level deeper than conscious thought. "What if I don't want my destiny?" Asher asked. "What if I want to write my own story?" Then you'll have to learn to use the system rather than letting it use you, Dante replied. And that, my dear Asher, is where I can help you. Over the following weeks, Asher found himself drawn deeper into Dante's world. The demon had a private study in the archive where he conducted his research into the deeper mysteries of magic. It was there that Asher learned about the true nature of his amulet and the forces that had shaped his life. The system artifact was indeed ancient, one of 7 items created by a civilization that had existed before recorded history. Each artifact was designed to guide its bearer toward a specific destiny, but the path to that destiny was always the bearer's choice. The system is not your enemy, Dante explained one evening as they worked together translating an ancient text. It's more like a mirror, reflecting back to you the truths you're afraid to face. And what truth is it showing me? Asher asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. That you are capable of love in ways that transcend the boundaries others have tried to impose on you, Dante replied. That your heart is large enough to contain feelings that others would find impossible to understand. The words hit Asher like a physical blow. He had been so focused on fighting the system's influence that he had never considered the possibility that it might actually be trying to help him discover something valuable about himself. But the oath, he protested. I was forced into it by circumstance. Were you? Dante asked. Or did you choose it because some part of you recognized that it was the key to unlocking your true nature? Asher had no answer for that, but he found himself thinking about Miles more and more often. The werewolf had left several messages for him, but Asher had been too afraid to respond. He told himself it was because he didn't want to hurt Miles further, but the truth was more complex than that. He was terrified of what he might discover about himself if he allowed those feelings to develop. The system's quest was not just about finding love. It was about accepting love, about opening himself to the possibility of being truly known and accepted by another person. I think I'm falling in love with 2 people, Asher confessed one night as he and Dante worked in the archive's quiet depths. Dante looked up from the manuscript he had been studying, his red eyes reflecting the candlelight. And that frightens you. Of course it frightens me, Asher said. It's impossible. People don't work that way. Don't they? Dante asked. Who made that rule? Who decided that love must be limited to one person at a time? Asher was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. Society. Tradition. The way things have always been done. And do you care about those things more than you care about your own happiness? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Asher looked at Dante and saw something in the demon's expression that made his heart race. Not just attraction, but understanding. Recognition. I care about you, Asher said, the words coming out before he could stop them. I care about you in a way that should be impossible, given how little time we've known each other. Dante set down his quill and looked at Asher with an intensity that made the young mage feel exposed and vulnerable. Time is not the measure of connection, he said softly. I have lived for centuries, and I have never met anyone who understands me the way you do. That's impossible, Asher protested. I'm just a failed noble with a gambling problem and a magical curse. You are so much more than that, Dante replied, moving closer. You are someone who has the courage to question everything he's been taught, to forge his own path through the world. You are someone who can love without conditions, who can see past the surface to the soul beneath. Before Asher could respond, Dante reached out and touched his face, fingers tracing the line of his jaw with reverent gentleness. The demon's skin was warm despite his supernatural nature, and his touch sent electricity racing through Asher's nervous system. I have been waiting for you, Dante whispered, not just in this lifetime but across all the lifetimes that came before. I have seen your face in dreams, heard your voice in the wind, felt your presence in the spaces between worlds. The kiss that followed was different from the one he had shared with Miles, where that had been gentle and questioning. This was intense and consuming. Dante kissed him like he was trying to memorize every detail, to capture something essential that might slip away if he wasn't careful enough. When they finally broke apart, both men were breathing hard, their faces flushed with desire and emotion. This is insane, Asher said, his voice rough with feeling. The best things usually are, Dante replied, his forehead resting against Asher's. The system's voice was practically vibrating with excitement. Significant emotional breakthrough detected. Subject has achieved second romantic milestone. Quest advancement, 27%. But for once, Asher didn't care about the system's analysis. He was too lost in the feeling of Dante's arms around him, the scent of winter and fire that seemed to cling to the demon's skin, the way his red eyes seemed to see straight through to his soul. I don't understand what's happening to me, Asher confessed. You're learning to love, Dante said simply. It's the most natural thing in the world, and also the most terrifying. But what about Miles? What about the feelings I have for him? Dante was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. What about them? Do you think loving me means you must stop caring for him? Doesn't it? Asher asked, confused. Only if you choose to see it that way, Dante replied. The heart is not a finite resource, Asher. It doesn't diminish when it's shared, it grows. The idea was revolutionary to Asher, who had been raised to think of love as a zero-sum game. But something about Dante's words resonated with a truth he had never been able to articulate. I need to see him, Asher said suddenly. I need to talk to Miles. Dante nodded, understanding clear in his eyes. Yes, you do. But first, you need to understand what you're going to say to him. I don't know, Asher admitted. I don't know how to explain any of this. Then don't explain, Dante said. Just be honest. Tell him what you feel, what you want, what you're afraid of. Let him decide how to respond. That night, Asher lay in his bed at the inn and stared at the ceiling, his mind racing with possibilities and fears. The system had been unusually quiet since his encounter with Dante, as if it were waiting to see what he would do next. He thought about Miles, about the warmth in his amber eyes and the gentleness of his touch. He thought about the way the werewolf had risked his safety to help a stranger, about the kindness he had shown without expectation of reward. And he thought about Dante, about the intensity of their connection and the way the demon seemed to understand him on a level that transcended ordinary communication. There was something ancient and powerful about their bond, something that felt like destiny made manifest. The system's voice finally stirred in his mind, softer than usual. Query. Subject appears to be experiencing internal conflict regarding romantic objectives. Clarification requested. I think I'm in love with both of them, Asher said aloud, the words feeling strange on his tongue. Interesting. Previous data suggested exclusive romantic bonding was the norm for your species. Maybe the norms are wrong, Asher replied. Maybe there's more than one way to love. Hypothesis acknowledged. Recommend field testing to verify accuracy. Asher almost laughed at the system's clinical approach to his emotional crisis. But there was something oddly comforting about its lack of judgment, its willingness to consider possibilities that others might dismiss out of hand. The next morning, Asher made his way back to Miles's apartment, his heart hammering against his ribs with each step. He had no idea what he was going to say, no plan for how to explain the complex feelings that had been growing inside him. He found Miles in the courtyard behind the building, practicing with a wooden sword. The werewolf moved with fluid grace, his muscles rippling beneath his shirt as he worked through a series of complex forms. Sweat glistened on his skin, and his auburn hair was damp with exertion. Asher, Miles said, stopping mid-form when he noticed the young mage watching him. I wasn't sure you'd come back. I wasn't sure either, Asher admitted. But I needed to see you, to talk to you. Miles set down his practice sword and grabbed a towel, wiping the sweat from his face. I'm listening. Asher took a deep breath, trying to find the words for what he wanted to say. I'm sorry for running away. I'm sorry for leaving you without an explanation. You were scared, Miles said simply. I understand that. Do you? Asher asked. Because I'm not sure I understand it myself. Miles moved closer, and Asher caught that wild scent again, something that spoke of forest nights and open skies. Try me. I'm bound by magic, Asher said, his hand moving to the amulet around his neck. This artifact is compelling me to find true love, but I don't know how to separate my real feelings from its influence. And you think that matters? Miles asked. The question surprised Asher. Of course it matters. How can I trust what I feel if I don't know where it's coming from? Miles stepped closer, his amber eyes intense. Do you feel happy when you're with me? Yes, Asher said without hesitation. Do you feel safe? Yes. Do you want to kiss me right now? Asher's breath caught. Yes. Then what difference does it make where those feelings come from? Miles asked. They're yours, aren't they? You're the one experiencing them. The simplicity of the argument was both frustrating and liberating. Asher had been so focused on the theoretical implications of his situation that he had lost sight of the practical reality of his emotions. It's more complicated than that, he said. Is it? Miles asked. Or are you making it more complicated than it needs to be? Before Asher could answer, Miles closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to frame Asher's face. The kiss that followed was deeper than their first, more confident and demanding. Asher melted into it, his hands fisting in Miles's shirt as he kissed back with desperate hunger. When they finally broke apart, both men were breathing hard. I've missed you, Miles said, his forehead resting against Asher's. I've missed you too, Asher replied, meaning it more than he had thought possible. Then stay, Miles said. Stop running from this and see where it leads. Asher looked into Miles's amber eyes and saw something there that made his heart race, not just desire, but love. Real, genuine love that had nothing to do with magic or destiny or ancient artifacts. I want to, he said, but there's something I need to tell you first. Miles stepped back slightly, his expression growing serious. What is it? I'm falling in love with someone else too, Asher said, the words coming out in a rush. A demon named Dante. I met him in the archive, and there's something between us that I can't explain. He watched Miles's face carefully, waiting for anger or jealousy or hurt. But the werewolf just looked thoughtful, as if he were considering a complex problem. Do you love him the way you love me? Miles asked finally. I don't know, Asher admitted. It's different. With you, I feel safe and warm and whole. With him, I feel like I'm on fire, like I'm capable of things I never imagined. And you think that means you have to choose between us? Asher blinked in surprise. Doesn't it? Miles was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on something beyond Asher's shoulder. My pack doesn't follow the same rules as human society, he said finally. We understand that the heart doesn't always fit into neat categories. What are you saying? I'm saying that I'd rather share you with someone who makes you happy than lose you to someone who makes you miserable, Miles replied. I'm saying that love isn't a competition, and I'm tired of treating it like one. The words hit Asher like a physical blow. He had been so prepared for rejection, for anger, for demands that he make an impossible choice. Miles's acceptance was more overwhelming than any hostility could have been. You would do that? Asher asked, his voice barely above a whisper. You would share me? I would do anything to keep you in my life, Miles said simply, even if it means learning to share you with someone else. The system's voice was practically singing with triumph. Breakthrough detected. Subject has achieved critical romantic milestone. Quest advancement, 45%. But Asher barely heard it. He was too busy processing the magnitude of what Miles had just offered him, not just love, but freedom. The freedom to be himself, to feel what he felt, to love without limits or conditions. I need you to meet him, Asher said suddenly. I need you to meet Dante. Miles nodded, though Asher could see the nervousness in his eyes. When? Now, Asher said. If you're willing. The meeting took place in Dante's study in the archive, surrounded by ancient books and flickering candles. Asher had sent a message ahead, explaining the situation in broad terms, and Dante had agreed to the encounter with characteristic calm. When Miles entered the study, the tension in the air was immediate and palpable. The werewolf and the demon regarded each other with the wariness of natural predators, each assessing the other for signs of threat or weakness. So you're the one who's been occupying Asher's thoughts, Dante said, his voice carrying a note of amusement. And you're the one who's been filling his head with talk of destiny and ancient magic, Miles replied, his tone carefully neutral. Asher stood between them, feeling the weight of their combined attention. I know this is awkward, but I need you both to understand something. I care about both of you, in different ways and for different reasons. I don't want to choose between you because I don't think I should have to. Both men turned to look at him, and Asher saw surprise in their eyes. I've been raised to think of love as a limited resource, he continued. Something that gets divided up and diminished when it's shared. But what if that's not true? What if love is something that grows stronger when it's given freely? Dante's expression was thoughtful. An interesting theory, but theory and practice are often very different things. Then let's test it, Asher said, his voice gaining strength. Let's see if three people can build something together that none of us could achieve alone. Miles crossed his arms over his chest. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that we try, Asher said. I'm proposing that we see if we can make this work, all three of us together. The silence that followed was deafening. Asher watched both men carefully, looking for signs of rejection or disgust. But what he saw instead was curiosity, consideration, and something that might have been hope. It wouldn't be easy, Dante said finally. 3 people means 3 times the complications, 3 times the potential for jealousy and misunderstanding. But it also means 3 times the strength, Miles added. 3 times the support, 3 times the love. Asher felt tears prick at his eyes. You're both willing to try? I'm willing to try anything that makes you happy, Miles said. As am I, Dante agreed. Though I reserve the right to change my mind if it becomes clear that this arrangement is causing more harm than good. Fair enough, Asher said, feeling a smile spread across his face. So where do we start? What followed was a period of careful exploration and discovery. The 3 men began spending time together, learning about each other's habits and preferences, finding ways to accommodate their different needs and desires. It was not without its challenges. Miles and Dante came from very different worlds, with different values and different approaches to life. The werewolf was direct and straightforward, while the demon was subtle and complex. They clashed over everything from philosophy to practical matters, and Asher often found himself playing mediator between them. But gradually, something began to shift. As they spent more time together, Miles and Dante began to see past their surface differences to the deeper qualities that Asher valued in each of them. The werewolf appreciated the demon's intelligence and wisdom, while the demon respected the werewolf's strength and loyalty. And Asher found himself falling deeper in love with both of them, not despite their differences but because of them. Miles provided the stability and security he had never known he needed, while Dante challenged him to grow and evolve in ways he had never imagined possible. The system's voice was a constant presence in his mind, tracking his progress and offering commentary on his emotional development. But gradually, Asher began to realize that the artifact's influence was becoming less intrusive, less controlling. It was as if the system was learning to trust him to make his own choices. Query. Subject appears to be achieving quest objectives through unconventional means. Clarification requested. I'm finding love, Asher said aloud one evening as he sat in Dante's study, watching the demon work on a complex translation, just not in the way anyone expected. Including yourself, the system observed. Especially myself, Asher agreed. The breakthrough came during the autumn equinox, when the 3 men decided to mark the occasion with a formal celebration. They prepared a feast together, each contributing their own specialties to the meal. Miles brought meat from his pack's hunting grounds, Dante provided wine from his personal collection, and Asher contributed bread baked with herbs from his family's garden. As they sat together around the table, sharing food and conversation, Asher felt a sense of completeness that he had never experienced before. This was what family was supposed to feel like, or not the rigid hierarchy of his noble upbringing, but a chosen bond built on mutual respect and affection. I want to make this official, he said suddenly, the words coming out before he could second-guess himself. Both men looked at him with surprise. What do you mean? Miles asked. I mean, I want to bind myself to both of you, Asher said. Not because of magic or destiny or ancient artifacts, but because I choose to. Because I love you both and I want to spend my life with you. Dante set down his wine glass, his red eyes intense. Are you certain? Such a binding would be unprecedented, and there would be no going back. I've never been more certain of anything, Asher replied. I've spent my whole life running from who I am, trying to fit into molds that were never made for me. I'm tired of running. I'm tired of pretending that I'm something I'm not. Miles reached across the table and took Asher's hand. Then let's do it. Let's make this official. The ceremony they devised was a blend of traditions from all three of their backgrounds. They exchanged vows of love and commitment, promising to support each other through whatever challenges lay ahead. They shared blood, wine, and fire in rituals that bound them not just emotionally but magically. As the ceremony concluded, Asher felt something fundamental shift inside him. The system's voice, which had been a constant presence in his mind for months, gradually faded to a whisper and then to silence. The amulet around his neck grew warm one last time, then settled into dormancy. Quest completed, the system said, its voice fainter than he had ever heard it. Subject has achieved true love through unconventional means. Parameters exceeded. Shutting down. Asher touched the amulet, feeling its now quiet weight against his chest. Thank you, he whispered. In the months that followed, their unconventional relationship became a source of strength rather than struggle. They faced challenges. Certainly, society was not always accepting of their arrangement, and there were practical complications that arose from sharing a life between three people. But they met each obstacle together, supporting each other through difficulties and celebrating each triumph as a shared victory. Miles proved to be a devoted partner, protective without being possessive, strong without being dominating. He brought stability to their household and served as a bridge between Asher and the wider world. Dante was the intellectual heart of their relationship, challenging both Asher and Miles to think more deeply about their choices and their place in the world. His centuries of experience provided wisdom and perspective that balanced Miles's youthful enthusiasm. And Asher found himself at the center of it all, no longer the lost and confused young man who had gambled away his future on a drunken whim. He had become someone who understood that love was not a game to be won or lost, but a choice to be made again and again, day after day. His family never forgave him for the path he had chosen, but Asher found that their approval mattered less than he had thought it would. He had built a new family, one based on choice rather than blood, and that was worth more than any inheritance or title. The system's quest had promised him true love, and it had delivered, just not in the way he had expected. He had learned that love was not about finding the one perfect person, but about finding the people who made him want to be the best version of himself. As he sat in their shared home one evening, watching Miles and Dante argue good-naturedly over a book they were both reading, Asher reflected on how far he had come. The curse that had once seemed like his doom had become his salvation, forcing him to confront truths about himself that he might never have discovered otherwise. The amulet around his neck remained silent, its ancient magic dormant once again. But Asher no longer needed its guidance. He had learned to trust his own heart, to make his own choices, to love without limits or conditions. He had found his true love not in one person, but in two. And in loving them, he had finally learned to love himself. The story that had begun with a foolish bet and a desperate oath had become something beautiful and rare. Asher had rewritten the rules of what was possible, proving that love could transcend any boundary, overcome any obstacle, and flourish in any form. As the fire crackled in the hearth and his partners continued their animated discussion, Asher smiled and settled deeper into his chair. He was home at last, surrounded by the people who knew him completely and loved him anyway. The curse had been broken, but the love it had revealed would last forever.